everybody to my studio. Today we're going to be doing a fall painting. I'm doing this on a hardboard canvas, and we'll be using some Lindy sprays today, and I'm just using the craft paint, but you can use whatever you have on hand. And we're only going to be using, I think it's 5 colors total, but mainly 3 of those will be used. The others are just like for the feet and a little bit on the bird's head. So I did have a supply list for you, and that's in the membership community page. You can find it there, and there's also the traceable. So if you don't have the traceable yet, or the information on the supplies, that's where you can get those for download. So right now what I'm doing here, I wanted to put another coat of gesso on this. It's already primed, this canvas, but I like it to be fairly smooth. I don't like a lot of tooth on a canvas. And to start off, I'm going to be doing a bit of a resist. Now this is just cheesecloth, and I've put some glazing medium on it, and I'm just laying it out. Now you can use matte medium or any kind of mediums really, and just soak your cloth so that when we place, this is just old sticker waste paper, and that way it won't stick to my paper. And I'm just patting it down to make sure that I had a good adhesion of that onto my canvas. And you can kind of see the little bit of wet medium on my canvas there. It'll leave a fairly not too much of a definite line to your canvas, but it will give you texture, depth to these sprays. So I'm just using Lindy sprays, and these, some of them are just the flat one, and then there's also the moon shadows. I really like the moon shadows. So there's a little bit of glistening to these, which it's not a lot of sparkle, but I'll leave that up to you. You can use whatever colors you want. I'm just using a very pale blue, and then the moon shadows have a little bit of sepia in them. And this one, it was supposed to be green and sepia, but really it's the sepia and the sparkle is the green. And I also wiped it off, so it just gave it a very faint bit of texture. And now I'm using a stencil, and if you have any of the a leaf, or I like the leaf one, but really there's no rule on what type of stencil you have to use. It's whatever you like. And I put matte medium back on the stencil and then dried it, and now I'm using all these sprays again, and this will actually give you more texture and a little bit more color from these sprays. So it's kind of like add and take off, add and take off. So play with this background as much as you want. You can drip, you can do whatever you want really. You can see a bit of the leaf stencil through here. I did let some of it drip, and I like the way it looked, so I'm leaving it as this. Now, the one thing that I do recommend is that you put a fixative on top of this spray. So if you have a workable fixative spray, then use that before you paint on top of this background, because I found that the Lindy's did still move. So it's best if you fix it. You can put a matte medium over top of it, but you have to be very careful because it will smear. The best thing is to do is to actually spray it. So I did trace my pattern onto my board, and I put mine pretty much in the center, and the reason being that I'm doing that faux paper edge on mine. Now you don't have to do that if you don't like it. You could leave it as is. So the paint that I was using on most of this are the burnt umbers, raw sienna, some white, a little bit of soft black, and also some glazing medium. I just like the glazing medium because if you just want very faint shadow or something, then the glazing medium is the best way to go. So I'm just using a fairly small brush, and it's about a 1/4 inch flat, and I'm just mixing the sienna and the umber with a little bit of white and a little bit of glazing medium. And this mix is pretty well what I'm going to work from. So you can either darken it or you can put a little more white in it and lighten it. And most of this Morning Dove is going to be painted with this one mix. So I'll leave you to watch me do this bird. There's not much I can tell you on how to paint this. It's basically follow the photo that I've given you with this, and it's a back and forth paint of light, dark, light, dark. And if you don't like it, just add some white on top of it or dark area if you're doing that area. That's the nice thing about the acrylics is you can just paint back over it again. So just watch how I'm doing my strokes. That's pretty well the only thing I can think of that will help you is that you have to do your strokes in the direction that the feathers would be going. So you don't want to just paint a mass any which way because it wouldn't look right. Your paint strokes are your feathers. So just keep in mind that where your feathers are going, your paint strokes must go. One thing I will tell you is that when we're doing this particular bird, um, there is a lot of different slight variations in the color of the feathers. So the best thing to do is look at what your base color would be. What is the main color underneath your highlight or your shadows, your middle color? And put that down first. So you can see on the wing here, I've put down kind of a sandy color. And then when you start putting paint on top of that, it'll be your highlights or your shadows, or it might be a different color in the feather itself. If you mix colors on your paintbrush, so don't do a really blended paint on your paintbrush. Mix them up so that there's a little white, a little bit of um, what other color would be in that one area that you're painting. So it might have like this here, I'm doing the shadow around the wing, and it has a little bit of that grayish color with a little bit of the umber, but it's not completely blended. It's kind of streaky, and if you do that, it makes the feather look a little bit more realistic, and it's much easier to do it if you do it that way. Um, the only definite color where that would have to go on this bird would be the little spots on its wings. They're definitely a dark umber color, or the tips of his wings. But it's kind of it's like dry brushing slightly, and it's just back and forth with different colors. Just pay attention to what your highlight, your shade, and your middle color are, and you should be fine. Now here I'm doing the bottom part of his wing. Now you notice that I put down the dark color first, and then I put a light color over top of it, because I know that the tip of that wing was darker. So as you can see, it doesn't matter if you put the light on or the dark on first. With acrylics, you can go on either way. So that's the great thing about it. So if you make a mistake and you put on the light and then the dark's too much, you can put light back over top of that. The only time where it gets a little tricky is if you keep putting paint in the same area. Once acrylic paint starts to dry slightly, when you go to put paint on that semi-dry area, it will actually lift the paint off your canvas. So if you find that your paint isn't going on properly, dry it and then go back over top of it with the colors that you want. It's something you have to really just do to understand it, and the more you do, the better you'll get at it, and the better you'll see the light, medium, and dark shades. So just play with it. You could always paint over it and start over again. Now, one thing these flat brushes are great for is very thin lines, but because of the size of this bird that we're doing, there are some white edges along the feathers of the wing in the dark areas, but it's very, very fine. So if you were doing this in oils, you could actually scratch it out. But because we're doing it in the acrylic on a canvas which has a lot of tooth, it doesn't really turn out that great when you scratch it out. So what I'm going to be doing, instead of painting it, I'm going to actually use a paint marker, and they're a godsend, really. It's so much easier. Just get your markers out when you want to do a really thin lines, like along the dark part of the wing there. Don't worry about trying to get it done with a paintbrush. You'll be pulling your hair out. I like using the markers, so just leave that till we start doing the marker parts of the wing, and it should be dry before you try to put those lines in. Now here I'm putting just the slightest amount of blue. It's just a little bit of, it's kind of a slate colored blue that they have on their head, just slightly down their back. But that's about all the blue we're going to do on this, and a little bit of orange for the foot. But again, I'm putting the blue down, and then I'm going to be using a little bit of a lighter color, just to slightly dry brush over top of that blue slightly. So just make sure you look at your reference photo of my finished painting to see exactly how deep the hue is and how much of that blue is showing. Now here I took out a round brush, I think it's a number 4, and you could use a black marker of like a paint marker to do the eye also. And the eye isn't completely round. It does have like a tear shape to it. So that's another thing you have to watch when you're doing birds if you want more of a realistic look to them. They do have a specific shape to their eye, and they have a little eyelid also that you can see. So really pay attention to your details when it comes to a more realistic look to your painting. So I'm looking at shadows and highlights in the bird's head area here. So I just put a little bit of a shadow by his beak there. And at the top of his head, you noticed I put in some white. And just more or less tapping it in, not stroking it, it's just a tap. And it's kind of like you're blending it as you tap it in. So that's again something that you just have to try. Here I'm using, it's a Caran d'Ache Pablo blue pencil, because the eyelid is kind of a bluish color, but it worked a bit, but not the greatest. And I tried the pencil on the eye, but it just wouldn't go on, so I'm using a paint marker instead. So now I'm just adding a little bit of that paint marker to those dark areas, because they're a little bit darker on the ends and also along the ends of the wing where the black areas were. And here I'm putting in just a little bit of an outline in the feather areas of the wing. The top part, or the shoulder, I guess you could call it, it's more fluffy, and then as you go down the wing, the feathers become more defined. And I'm not going up and around everything. I'm lightly doing it, so you don't want a really hard, definite line. Just kind of soft. If you find it's too hard, just press your finger down on it and it'll take some of that paint away. And the same goes with the black. If you find it's too dark, just either get a paper towel or your finger and just dab it. When you're doing these lines too with the white and the black paint markers, look at your sketch, the traceable that I gave you, and try and follow the lines that I gave you for those feathers, and then you won't get lost on where to put them. Or you could actually put the traceable back on your painting with a maybe a white tracing paper for the bottom part, if you're very lost in where to put it. And lots of times that's what I will do. I'll just put my tracing back on so I can get the lines that I need back onto the paint itself. Okay, so now I'm putting in the little lines in the feet, and I'm just using a Sharpie marker. Um, Now you can't use a Sharpie marker for all of this stuff. I just attempted this part here because I wanted a fairly fine line. If you use a Sharpie marker on your acrylic, it will eventually kill your marker. So you have to make sure you brush your marker off after you do any kind of work on your acrylic paint. So then I just put a little bit of watered down white wash through the center of that foot just to give it a little bit of dimension. Okay, now we're doing the sunflower. So this is when you need to either um, take your paint, if it can be kind of confusing where the darks are and where's the lights. So what you can do is on your um, tracing, I've colored in the areas that were dark. Now you don't have to go exactly the way I did it. If you accidentally go over a certain part, don't worry about it. You can always paint back over it again. So um, I've just put all my darkest darks in first, and most of those, if you think about it, because the sun is coming from above, everything underneath this sunflower will be dark. So pretty much anything that's hanging down like a fair distance is going to be dark, and in the center. So follow your reference photo and your traceable for the areas that should be the darkest. And then the next thing I'll be doing is making the mid-tone for this. And it's going to be the Sienna color. And I just basically put in the whole thing, all the areas that weren't painted in this sienna color, and then that's my mid-tone. So then I will do my darks and my highlights on top of this. And again, this is a back and forth thing too. If you don't like it, then you can paint over it again. So if you don't like, maybe you put too much dark in an area that should have been light, you can take your light and go right over top of that dark area. So don't worry about making a mistake, because you can always take the paint and go back over it. Okay, I'm using like a sandy color. If you have Titan Buff, that would work also. Or brown and then lighten it with a white. Um, or a cream and you put a little bit of dark brown in it. That's going to be part of my highlight color. So I'm just looking for the highlights right now, and I'm putting those in. And this will be kind of a middle color also. There's there's quite a few. There's just not, three colors in this type of painting. Like there's just not a shadow, a midtone, and a highlight. There's many shades of those three in this whole thing. So you're lightening and darkening each shadow, each highlight, and each midtone. So it's basically playing with it. So anything on the top of this stem is probably going to be lighter than the um, bottom part of the stem, like the underneath of the stem. Now, where the bird is sitting, you're going to naturally have a shadow, so you're going to have that part a little bit darker and very dark right underneath that curve, because that'll be the darkest shadow. So you do have to keep this in mind where your shadows would be. So always remember where your light source is coming from in your mind, and then you can figure out, you know, anything underneath would be darker and anything on top is going to be lighter. So it's just play back and forth with the colors, and if you want you can stick directly to what I've painted, but I always like to see you guys just expand, try something, try a little bit different. You never know, you might like it better than mine, and like I said, you can always paint back over that area if you don't like it. And most of my paintings, that's what I do. I'll try to um, something different, maybe a different stroke or a different way of putting the paint down. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. And if I don't, I just paint back over it and start over again. I put my base coat on and then I start my highlights and shadows. So play as you're going. This is the best time for you to experiment is with acrylic paint. The more you do these lessons, the more you will learn to see things differently, and you'll pay more attention to shadows and highlights, and before you know it, it'll just become an automatic thing to you. So don't be scared to try something. Just try it, and then if it didn't work, paint over it. I kind of got out of frame here, but see, I didn't like the color I put, so I painted over it. And there, I moved it over a little bit for you. Moved my frame for the reference. So I'm finishing this dead leaf here, and I'm base coating it with one color, and then I'll put my highlights and my lowlights in. So as you can see, I'm putting a base coat in all of these other areas of the sunflower. And a lot of this will be covered with a highlight, but you'll still get a little bit showing on the edges, which would be the less highlighted areas. So this is why I like to base coat, is you still get a little of that showing through your painting, and it gives it more depth. Okay, so I did dry this because there was quite a bit of wet paint, and you don't want to try and put another color on top of a semi-dry paint because you'll lift it. Now, right now I'm um, just putting in a little bit of dark areas. I did put some of that sand color on top of this sunflower head. And you can see the lighter areas are just on the top areas. So you got to think about um, each one of those little, looks like leaves, uh, are part of the either dead flower petal or there's um, a green part that goes around the edge of they look like little leaves that are stuck onto the head of the sunflower, and when they dry up they get um, very straw-like, and that's what these little highlight areas are those little pieces of dried up leaf. So again, it's, you just take your highlight and your low light or your shadows, and you just go back and forth until you make it the way you want. Um, Now with the stem, it's almost better because there's a lot of wrinkles in the stem, a lot of ridges and stuff. So you could just dry brush the darks and the low lights on the stem, and it would probably do what you want. If you don't like it, again, paint over it. Um, I just went back and forth with different colors. So some of the Sienna, some of the Umber, then a bit of white, and then just back and forth until I played with it until I liked it. So I just remembered though that that underneath of that curve of the stem is going to be the darkest area. And that little ring that goes around the stem too, it'll have a shadow on the inside of that ring. So now I'm putting in just a little bit more shadow areas. It's not quite as dark as the darkest dark, but um, when the sunflower is decaying like this, there's so much texture in these flower heads. So you have to have a lot of different strokes in your painting to give it that look. And so you'll be adding a lot of very fine lines, basically, kind of dry brushing to give it that look. I'm trying to get this leaf done, and it's not exactly um, completely one color. This paint was fairly a little bit on the translucent side, so I'm putting a little bit of that sand color and mixing it with the sienna just to make it a little more opaque. And then I'll go back over it with the shadows and the highlights. So I hope I'm uh, telling you as much as possible how to do this type of painting. Um, it's a very difficult thing to give you stroke by stroke information in this type of painting. It's more in you have to decide. So it's more about you trying things out. Um, there's really no way of doing, okay, now you take this color and you make this stroke here. It would take forever to do a painting if I did that. You have to believe in yourself. You have to try and think about your shadows and your highlights. That's the best way I can um, tell you how to do this is in your mind with your reference. You have to remember where your highlights are and your shadows. That's how I learned, and that's what I think about when I paint or draw. And with painting, it's so much easier because you can paint over it if it was wrong. Because a lot of times you do think, okay, well, if I do this, put this shadow here, then it'll look like this. And then when you should do it, it doesn't look the way you want. So then you put your base coat on again and you try it over again. And really, it's experience doing that teaches you how to do these paintings with shadows and highlights. So really, don't be hard on yourself if it's not turning out. Um, you just have to do. You just have to try things and experiment with highlights and shadows. That's your most important thing is to get dimension, you have to have highlights and shadows, contrast in colors, in um, if you want things looking with dimension. So if you got any kind of ideas for me that you would like me to um, teach you in a certain way, please, by all means, let me know. If there's something that would be easier for you in doing these types of paintings, I'll be more than happy to try and do that. But I really need your input. Um, if this is working for you, or maybe you need it done in a different way. So please let me know. Give me some comments, and I'll get right back to you. Okay, so that's pretty much done. And now I'm going to be doing the faux torn paper, I guess you could say. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of paper and I've torn the paper a little bit on the edges, and the right corner, top corner, is folded, so I'm going to have it look like it's rolled, the one corner. So I'm just taking my a pencil and drawing the outline around. Now I made sure that it was the right distance all the way around for each side, and I'm going to use this pencil line as my um, edge of where to shadow. And this is all about um, a shading the edge. So it's not a definite hard line on the edge. It's going to be a shaded line. So it gradually gets softer and softer as it goes out towards the bird. And the way I'm going to do this is taking a shader brush, so it's a flat, probably about a half inch would be good. And you want something that has a real chiseled edge to it. You don't want anything fluffy. A fluffy brush won't do this shading as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of the raw sienna, and I'm going to put some um, glazing medium on my brush, and then I'm going to dip one corner of the brush into the sienna color. That corner will go on to the inside of the paper edge. I'm just testing the colors here because I want something kind of uh, rusted looking in a way, old, old paper, how it's got that brownish color, sepia color. So I'm just kind of making that color. Now I'm putting a little bit more medium on my brush there because it was. So watch as I dip in the corner of my brush, not the whole tip, just the corner. That way you're only getting a slight variation of shade. Now you do see the whole brush mark, and I will be taking a baby wipe and just lightly blending that into the background so it's not so definite, that line. But you can see that it does give a nice gradual shade mark to that edge mark. Now this is that corner that is rolled. So I did the edge first, and then later I'll shade it so that it looks more rolled looking. There's the you can see now it looks rolled. I'm just taking some more of that color off so it's not so defined. There, see, I'm sweeping it towards the corner, so the direction the paper would be folding back out to, and it gives it kind of a streaking look, but gives it kind of a textured look of the old paper. I'll hold it up in a minute and I'll show you. So now I'm going to have to do the outer edge of that. So where the paper would be on the wall or table or whatever it's on would leave a slight shadow on the table. So now I'm going to have to use a little bit of that umber color and shade the outside around the paper, and that'll give it dimension. Now in the areas that are sloping up on the paper, those will have more shadow because that'll give it a look of the papers actually curving up. Okay, now I'm going to be taking a script liner and just giving certain areas a little bit more darker of that umber color. So wherever, this is where a torn piece of that paper, so it would be a little darker underneath. And you don't want to outline the whole thing, just in certain areas where it would be torn or lifted off the table would be your darker areas. So just touching up a few areas that I thought needed a little bit more. Adding the little tacks or nails or whatever you want. And I've just put the raw sienna down on as a base coat. And then I just highlight it with a highlight from the top and a shadow around the bottom. Now I do use a Faber-Castell pit marker for the shadow from the nail onto the paper for a little bit, and then marker right around the very bottom of that nail head. There you go. And I'm just going to put a little bit of white, very, very watered down. I'm using a sponge that's really wet, and just plain white, and I'm just giving it a light wash of white just to tone down that outer edge so it doesn't compete with the inside paper color, and that way your paper is more noticeable. And there we go. So it just brings out that centerpiece a little bit when you do that. And there we go. And that's our project for this month. And I hope you enjoyed. And please let me know if you have any questions. And if you could post on the membership only on Facebook, that would be great. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or get a hold of me on Twitter or Facebook, and I'll get right back to you. And if you have any suggestions for coming up member streams, please feel free to suggest things. It helps me in planning, and I hope this was creative inspiration for you. Have a great day, everyone.